Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is an archaeologist all the way from Edinburgh in Scotland. Her name is Holly Young. Welcome to the show, Holly. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I got very excited when I learned about your career, what you do. It's fun. Obviously, you're a part of my community. You've been a regular follower of mine, so just want to say thank you for that, by the way. But yeah, I got excited, just like my whole community did when we found out about this. So let's just jump straight into this.
Go for it.
What sparked your initial interest in archaeology?
Do you know what? It's funny. People ask me this question quite a lot, and I can never really remember. But I think it's probably the same as a lot of archaeologists. I watched a lot of Time Team when I was a kid. Lots of programs like that. I also watched Two Men in a Trench. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
No, I can't say I have.
So it was Neil Oliver and Tony Pollard, and they used to do like battlefield archaeology. And it's not something I'm particularly interested in. And obviously Neil Oliver's become a bit of a questionable character recently. But loved that show. And yeah, it was I did history all the way through high school as well. And it was kind of like my subject. But I didn't want to spend my entire life in a library. And at that point, I kind of thought that's what history was. So, yeah. And one of my history teachers is an archaeologist as well. And I think it was sort of subconsciously just in the back of my head. But yeah, turned out to be a pretty good choice. So it's like...
You're talking about some of the shows that you watched growing up. Did you ever catch, I think it was Adam Hart Davis and his show?
Oh, I don't know.
There was a show I remember that he did, or a series of shows. So, like one of the most famous ones was What the Romans Did for Us.
All right.
Maybe, I don't know.
Aqueducts.
Yeah. No,
so not just that bit of the Life of Brian when they're sitting talking about what the Romans did for us. It's just like aqueducts.
No, shows like that were really good. Because I think
Time Team especially, I think, had a big impact on a lot of, at least of my generation, becoming archaeologists. And obviously you got films like Indiana Jones and all that, a little bit so far away from what archaeology is actually like.
So like, how does one go about studying archaeology? Like, what's the studying like for this particular field?
I mean, it was good. I mean, I had a brilliant time at university, which is why I kept coming back. So I go to the University of the Highlands and Islands. So it's a university that's based just in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's made up of like, I think 13 or 14 different colleges that kind of all come together to be one university.
Oh, wow.
And it was the only university that I got into because I didn't have the grades.
Yeah.
But it turned out for the best. I mean, it's a lot of, so in your first 2 years, you do archaeology modules alongside sort of other topics, I think like you do in other universities, and then it sort of narrows down. But we did have sort of some really good like fieldwork modules and things like that run over the summer, excavation skills. It's a really great program, and if it is something that's people find interesting, it's worth going into. It's good fun.
And did you sort of go straight into archaeology coming out of university? Were there any like, I don't know, placement schemes?
So a lot of companies will do sort of traineeships. So I finished my undergrad in 2016, and I was digging at the Ness of Brodgar, which is a really big Neolithic site on Orkney, which is where I live now. And I'd applied to a bunch of companies coming out, and one of the supervisors at that site, she worked for one of these companies. And so I kind of got a little sidle in that way, because unfortunately archaeology is really one of those businesses where a lot of it's about who you know and like making connections. It's horrible to say, but it's true. It's such a small world that everyone does know everyone. So you kind of have to have a sort of social side as well and be able to get on with people because it makes a difference. But yeah, so I got a job as a trainee archaeologist. So I moved from Orkney, which is where I did all my degrees, like I said, to Gloucestershire, and lived in Gloucestershire for 3 years digging with Cotswold Archaeology, and I got straight out of university. So I think I graduated and moved down south in the same week.
What does the sort of career path for archaeology actually look like? What are So talk to us a little bit about your position right now and like where you could sort of go from here.
So at the moment, well, I'm starting my PhD in a few weeks.
Oh, congrats.
But thank you. But I have had I think it's probably quite a typical career path up to this point anyway, is that I left to go and work in commercial archaeology. So there's sort of like two paths in archaeology. So you can do the research side of it, which is through the universities and things like that. And then there's commercial archaeology, which is when you kind of go, the way I describe it is like, it's when you go to building sites to record all the archaeology before they build on top of it. It is much, much more complicated than that. But yeah, so you go and you like evaluate areas of the landscape and see what archaeology is there for companies. So it's the sort of the side that you're more likely to get a wage out of if you're in your early career.
So in those particular instances, what criteria would be necessary, or maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, like what things would be necessary to, in the same way that you have like listed buildings that can't be touched or can't be renovated, like what things would be required in order for you to kind of stop people from building on that land? Like, let's say it's like you know,
yeah,
an
it's
area.
one of those things. People think it wouldn't take a lot. It would take a lot to. So it would be like you'd have to find the next Pompeii or something like that. Like I remember digging on sites just in the middle of communities and people walking past going, "Oh, we're just gonna sprinkle some Roman coins around so you can't build here." And I'm like, it's not gonna stop it. And also, where are you getting these Roman coins from?
Do you ever have like instances where you have to dig in areas that have already been built up? So I don't know, like let's say, okay, yeah, so like someone's garden or something.
Yeah, I mean, I've done test pits in people's gardens, but I've also dug in city centres and things like that. Okay. So I dug on a really big site in the middle of Bristol, and it was great, and it's amazing. So it's a lot. It tends to be more modern archaeology, but I mean that in itself is interesting. I mean, I think they were, if I remember correctly, they were sort of the houses for people who used to work in warehouses and stuff, and I think they'd all been built. Most of them had been bulldozed and built on top of it, and then fallen down again and stuff like that. But we found things like I was digging a coal cellar, and it was full of these beautiful sort of 18th century hand-blown glass bottles, and like a 300-year-old corked bottle of red wine, and bottles from Bristol Royal Infirmary that still had liquid in them.
Wow.
Yeah, so this modern stuff is just as interesting as sort of your prehistory and your Romans and your Greeks and things like that. So yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, I want to take you back. So, what was your first experience like in like your first field experience?
So my first field experience would have been my field school module when I was in university. So I think I was 18, so not far off a decade ago. That's horrendous.
I feel your pain.
That's horrendous. It's coming up to my sort of decade anniversary as ever starting doing anything in archaeology, and I'm like, that's horrendous. But yeah, so I was digging on an Iron Age site on Orkney, which is a big Broch settlement. So those are you get big Atlantic roundhouses, big tower. They kind of look like big chimneys. But it was amazing, and I really caught the bug. And I think that's what happens to a lot of archaeology students, is that it kind of got to the point where the digging in the summer was getting me through the essay writing for the rest of the year. But it was brilliant, and it was brilliant.
What would you say are the best things about archaeology in general?
I mean, I've always just found that the community is so good. The archaeology, like digging things up, is also just like you pick something up that someone hasn't picked up for 2,000 years, or you're uncovering a wall that hasn't been seen for 5,000 years or something. It's genuinely insane, that sort of being the first person to see this in however many years. But also, like, it's a really nice community for the most part, and the people in archaeology really make it, the people who work there. And I think it really makes or breaks a site that you're on, the team that you're digging with. So those are kind of the two things I think that I enjoy most about archaeology, is the archaeology itself, but also the act of digging is so much better when you're surrounded by good people. So, yeah.
What? Let's flip it up. What are the
Go
worst
for it.
things? The worst things about archaeology?
Digging in the winter. That's rubbish. I dug in the Beast from the East. That was fun. I was digging my feature, and then I sort of turned around to get something and turned back, and it was covered in snow. And and I was just like, how am I supposed to take a photograph of this? It's covered in snow. But and then yeah, just it's usually the weather. But also I find that I don't think everyone finds this in commercial archaeology, but I found that it became a bit soulless when it's sort of just for the getting through it to then build on top of it. And it's like, because there's so many restrictions like budget and time, it kind of becomes more of just like doing this, and this, rather than actually being interested in the archaeology. And I think I've kind of got it back now that I've come back to university, but there was kind of an attitude, at least where I was digging, that being enthusiastic about it wasn't cool, if that makes sense. And I mean, we were all enthusiastic because we all went to university and things like that, but it was kind of like to be openly, at least this is my experience of it anyway. It's probably not for many others, but it got to the point where you kind of disparage yourself and you're like, oh, this isn't important. What I'm doing is not important. And I still do it now and people pull me up on it. And I'm like, oh, wait, actually, it's all right to be enthusiastic and interested in the archaeology. And I'm not just here because it's my job, if that makes sense. At least that's how I felt. And that's why I ended up leaving commercial archaeology for the most part, which was that I kind of just lost my love for it a bit.
Could you explain a little bit, firstly, what commercial archaeology is, just in a nutshell, and then also what the other alternatives would be to that?
So this is like saying, so commercial archaeology is the sort of where most of the jobs are. It's when you go to building sites and you record all the archaeology that way, or you are going and you're just digging little little eval trenches into the ground to see what's there, to see if there's potential for building there, or if so we go and I can talk, it's good, words are good. A company will ask us to go and evaluate an area to see if it's worth moving their proposed location, if that makes sense. And things like that, doing geophysical survey and things like that. And then you've got the more academic side of it, which is kind of the two parties. Yeah. So
that's your two options then. You don't have any.
Pretty much, yeah. Or museums, obviously. You've got museums in the heritage sector and things like that. So there are lots of routes. It's very much kind of, you get a lot of applicable skills from doing archaeology. So there's lots of different ways you can go with it. But the main two are sort of your academics and then your commercial archaeologists.
So what are like the main kind of restrictions or regular fights that you tend to find yourself with regards to, like, you know, commercial builders or whoever, councils, I don't know?
I mean, I was never particularly high up in commercial archaeology, so I didn't have to deal with a lot of that. I just turned up, dig, and then left. But I mean, you're always sort of serving several different masters, if that makes sense. There's always several different people you're trying to keep happy. You're trying to keep your company happy. You're trying to keep the county archaeologist happy, who's sort of, you get a person in every county who's in charge of basically the archaeology of that area. And you're trying to keep them happy. You're trying to keep the builders happy. You're trying to keep the people in charge of the builders happy, site managers happy. There's just so many people that it gets kind of political. And it's tricky to sort of avoid the tension.
Have you ventured outside of Scotland for your archaeology, or has it just been isolated to Scotland?
Well, apart from Gloucestershire, so I worked in Gloucestershire. But that's about as far as I did. Unfortunately, I made the terrible choice of specialising in Scottish archaeology, which unfortunately means that I have no need to go abroad to nice sunny places to go and have a look at their archaeology. And I was just like, well, you made a bad choice there.
I just wondered if there's any difference between how archaeology is performed in Scotland versus in England or other places. Not
so much in the UK. The UK is fairly sort of the same. But I do know that, like, for example, I think a friend of mine did a lot of survey work in Italy. So they tend to, I think they focus a lot more on survey. And then I know that I've got Canadian friends who say that it's really different digging in Canada than it is here. I'm not 100% sure how, but yeah. So it is different everywhere you are. but I very much only have a Scottish/Gloucestershire perspective.
What's the farthest you've travelled for a day's work?
For a day's work?
Or just in general, a project or something?
Suffolk.
Suffolk.
The sunny climes of Suffolk.
So like in these instances, are your expenses paid? Like if it's a really long trip, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
They take care of you.
I mean, just now, I'm not at home. I'm in accommodation provided for the job that I'm on, which is why this wallpaper. I would never choose this wallpaper myself. But, so yeah, I mean, we got accommodation paid for. We would get extra money if we were in charge of driving people. You get, on some places you get subs, which are kind of like you get a certain amount of money per night to sort of, if you're putting a B&B, it's to pay for your meals and things like that. So you're never out of pocket when you're on away jobs, or you shouldn't be anyway. Or at least that's what the good companies do.
That's good.
Whether that's the same everywhere, I wouldn't know.
No, they need to take care of you, especially if you're doing that much physical work. And it's, I mean, I'm guessing it's like an all-day kind of thing. Like, well, what's the average in terms of like hours?
Average, I'd say, working hours 8 till 4, but traveling time is outside of that. So you have to be on site at 8. So I've been at the office anywhere from like 7:45 to 4:30 in the morning. So.
Have you learned anything through archaeology that's changed the way that you view the world?
Just that we haven't changed that much.
Interesting.
And that's something I really, not physically or anything like, but I think in attitude. So people laugh when I say this. So my specialism at the moment is shells.
Mm-hmm.
And so my PhD is on exploitation of shellfish in the Iron Age in Scotland. And people always like to look at the evidence of shellfish as being primarily food related, which for the most part it probably is. But you find the occasional shell that shows that someone's probably just picked it up because it was pretty.
Yeah.
And the things like that, people always like to think that in prehistory people were just surviving, but they weren't. They were living. And they weren't that different from us. They liked pretty things. They liked good food. They drank beer, things like that.
Yeah, I always wonder about stuff like that. Like, because when I was learning history at school, I always wondered, like, why don't we focus on finding out what the day-to-day life was like, what the attitudes were like? You know, they always used to focus on, well, this date happened and then this thing happened, and that's why it always gets boring at school. But you know what I mean, like.
Well, that's why I think I prefer archaeology to history now, is that archaeology does tend to be more about the everyday rather than, I mean, there is parts that talk about sort of the big figureheads of history, like I think it was Leicester University digging up Richard III and things like that. So, I mean, there are that elements of it, but our everyday job is looking at the everyday of them, which is something that I've always found much more interesting personally. It's always nice to find the big, shiny, amazing things, but then there's also an element of like finding the things that people just did every day. It's just so much more gratifying, I think.
Have you ever been involved in any major discoveries that changed what we thought we knew about the past?
No, but I've dug on some fairly large-scale digs that are very important. So I've never really found anything that people have gone, oh my God. But yeah, I mean, the Ness of Brodgar is a big one that comes to my head. It's big Neolithic settlement. Well, not settlement. It's very confusing. It's very big and very impressive structures. But it's changing the way that people think about the Neolithic in a lot of ways. And it's nice to see that happening and just be like a small part of that. I'm not doing it justice at all, but it's nice to be a small part of that.
What was the full name of it again?
The Ness of Brodgar.
The Ness of Brodgar. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's focus a little bit more on just like things that you've discovered. So and a lot of these questions I will say is where they came from our community, so that's pretty cool. Have you ever found anything Celtic? And if so, what did you find?
I haven't found anything Celtic, and Celtic is a bit of a funny term anyway. Okay. So it's something that is kind of, I don't know a huge amount about it because it's not really my field, but there's a lot of argument about who the Celts were, where they were, all that stuff about that, and it's very sort of contested term. So it's kind of hard to say what people mean by Celtic.
I think most people assume it's like, you know, Scotland's answer to the Romans, isn't it? Kind of thing, you know, like.
Well, I mean, Scotland had the Romans to a point.
Yeah, but like, what I mean is like that were like that was the major group of people in Scotland for a time.
It's not really like that in a way. It's sort of a complicated term that's people apply to certain groups of people, and it seems to change between different people, and it's all very confusing, which is why I tend to stay away from that area of history. But yeah, no, nothing that you would particularly brand as Celtic, I don't think, but Scottish stuff, yes. Anything
Roman?
Yeah, so Gloucestershire is mostly Roman stuff. It's just Romans like plowing through all the history before it. I found a couple of coins. They weren't very nice coins, but they were coins. But most of my time spent down south, I was digging Roman field systems.
Oh, right, okay.
So you're just digging ditches.
Oh.
Over and over again. So many ditches, so little time. Occasionally you get a pit. You know, it's all exciting. I did get to dig a Roman villa though once, which was pretty great.
What was the scale?
Huge. It was a huge thing. But to the point where our digging team was split into two.
Oh wow!
On two different areas of the site. But it was my very first job as a working archaeologist, and it was in October, and it rained most of the time.
Oh no!
And it was solid clay as well, and we were all sort of digging the rooms of these villas that were all underwater.
Do they not give you? You know, like, I don't know, maybe I'm just being naive here, but like under stuff you can like at least shield yourself from the rain with, or are you just doing it purely outside?
We've got waterproofs and stuff, but that's about it.
Yeah, but like, come on, like you must have like, I don't know what the word is, like covers.
We don't, no.
No?
No, we're just digging straight in the rain. It has to, in commercially especially, it has to be really bad before they let you go inside.
Man. I would have thought that would be like a sensible move, like to keep and also to stop the site from being spoiled by the elements as well.
It's funny. It is one of those things that I remember when I was like digging in torrential downpour. I'd be like, "This is pointless. Why am I doing this? Just ruining the archaeology." But it is the thing of like time restraints.
Right.
Like if we had all the time in the world to dig it, yeah, great. Come off. Don't ruin the floor deposits or thing like that. For example, like research digs, which is like the Ness of Brodgar, like I was talking about earlier, the big Neolithic site. There's lots of really delicate original floor deposits, so full of evidence of the activity of the people who use these buildings, and so when it rains, it can damage these floor deposits quite a lot. So a lot of the times we have to cover them and then come off site and wait till it stops raining. You can't really do that in archaeology just because you don't have in commercial archaeology just because you don't have the time. And so you kind of just have to do the best you can and try not to step on the archaeology too much.
You ever discovered?
I'm not particularly graceful. It wasn't something I was very good at.
Have you ever discovered anything Saxon?
Yes, I have. Well, Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon, cool.
So I dug on an Anglo-Saxon graveyard in Gloucestershire. Ooh. And Anglo-Saxons are very big on their grave goods.
Okay.
So alongside the sort of skeletons of all these amazing, assuming were amazing people, they had amazing artifacts, personal items, and it was amazing. And in one of them, I got to find a sword, which is pretty awesome. There's kind of no getting higher than finding a sword, so I was just kind of like, well, I can retire now. Done now, found a sword, I'm leaving.
What kind of things would they tend to bury their dead with then? Like, what kind of things?
So if they were, I mean, you want to use the quote-unquote warriors, they tend to get buried with their weapons. So the guy that I was excavating, he had his sword across his chest, and he also had like a little knife, and there was lots of evidence of other little sort of bits of what he was wearing, bits of metal. But there were also other bodies that had sort of glass beads that would have been on strings, and there was one woman who had, we found that she had this like weird ivory ring, and we just couldn't figure out for the life of us what it was. And it turned out that it was the handle of like a bag.
Oh,
so the fabric of the bag had eroded away,
right.
but you could see sort of like the rivet decoration on it, and it had all her sewing stuff in it. So it was full of like copper needles and loom weights and stuff like that. It was incredible. That's the site I always bring up whenever anyone's like, what's the best site you've dug on? I was like, yeah, that one was pretty cool. Pretty great.
Was there anything unique about just in general the way they made their graves, or their, I don't know, I assume they didn't have, did they have coffins or anything?
Some of them had coffins, yeah. I mean, at the bottom of that site, we found some big remnants of wooden coffins, but wood and stuff doesn't survive very well.
Right.
So if they did have coffins, it's eroded away. A lot of the graves were stone lined.
Okay.
So you had sort of big round stones around the edges of them. And I think it's a thing because, again, Anglo-Saxon, it's not really my area of specialty, so I'm not hugely knowledgeable about it, but I think all of the graves all faced in the same direction, and that's quite a common thing that you get in graveyards generally. So that, yeah. But the grave goose is quite a big thing for the Anglo-Saxons. They're very big on there.
Was there anything done to, I don't know what the word term would be, I just think of Egypt, but like mummify, embalm bodies?
No.
Like that? No.
They're just buried. Similar ways as not far off what we would do now, probably.
Have you ever discovered anything Viking?
No, to my great embarrassment. I wish. I'd love to find something properly Viking. I've never really dug on a proper Viking site. So that's the problem. And there's so much of it on Orkney. And I'm just like, when will my time come?
Your time will come.
But I mean, there's things like boat burials that have been found on Orkney and things like that. And they're just amazing. So I've seen some of the artifacts from them. They're just incredible. Like big, I think there's a big whalebone placard thing, with decorations and stuff on it, and jewelry and weapons. One day.
So you mentioned one particular dig that stood out to you. Have there been any other amazing discoveries that you've made that stick out in your mind?
Not really, not amazing discoveries. I'm sort of, for a long time, I thought I just sort of repelled archaeology. So I was just sort of like sitting there, I was like, of course I'm not finding anything, and my friend's finding coins around the corner. I'm just like, but yeah, no, nothing that particularly sort of really stands out aside from that sword.
Or anything that made you excited, maybe. It doesn't have to be like an amazing thing, but...
I mean, everything makes me excited. I'm just an overexcited human being generally. I remember, so that Brock site I dug when I was in my very first field school, I dug on that site for five summer seasons, I think. And I remember I was digging in this structure and we found this wall that we didn't know was there. And I just got so excited. It was amazing. It's just like jumping around and things like that. It's so good. It's just, the excitement you get when you find something is just indescribable. And it can be something so plain. And it's always exciting.
I'm going to change the tone now.
Go for it.
What are some of the worst discoveries or digs that you've been a part of?
Worst digs.
Anything that maybe was like just depressed you or made you really sad or just like really bad?
I did dig on a site that had lots of poorhouse graves on it. That was quite depressing. So the way that they used to dig graves for poorhouses is that they would dig a grave a week and just put everyone who died in the same grave.
Oh wow. Okay.
And they're quite distinctive when you find them. At least this is what I was told at the time when we were digging it, is that they're quite distinctive because the graves are quite a lot bigger. So, and then like further up on the site, we were finding these sort of strip graves that were full of kids, and that's just depressing as anything. It's just like, at the time I was kind of like, oh, this isn't affecting me, and now I think back on it now, I'm just like, I think that's probably had quite a big effect on me.
What era would this have been? Like time?
I think they were Victorian.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also the misfortune of sort of digging graves that era is they tend to be a bit fresher as well, which is a little bit, it's just unnerving. in a way.
Do you see like remnants of skin still? Or
I haven't, but I do have friends who've dug things that have had like skulls with bits of skin on them, and one of my friends dug a post hole that had hair in it. And things like that. It's just grim, and it's sort of just, it's quite easy to detach from when they're so far in the past, which is maybe a bad thing. Maybe we shouldn't. I was having a discussion with someone I'm working with about this yesterday, is that these are all people, and we're all people. So maybe it's a bad thing that we've become quite so detached.
I don't know, you know. I mean, I think that in your line of work, and also, you know, morticians and stuff like that, like it's important work that, I mean, someone has to do. So to some extent, you do need to be able to disassociate and disconnect. Because I mean, like for instance, like how would morticians and undertakers and stuff be able to do their jobs if they weren't able to do that? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. But I think the line gets crossed when you become so detached that it kind of can get a bit disrespectful in a way.
Okay.
Like people deal with things with humor, and that's fine. But I experience when people are saying things that are a little bit, maybe they're just a little bit too far detached. So it's got negatives and positives, I think.
Do you mean like a lack of professionalism on a dig or something?
No, not lack of professionalism, just more like dark humor to an overextent. And sort of, I've heard stories about people taking selfies with skeletons and things like that, and I'm like, it's not cool. Like, I even have trouble, like, there's a lot of people have I have a problem with people posting pictures of skeletons online on social media and things like that, and it's quite a sort of a hot topic, because some people don't see a problem with it at all, and then others do, and I find it a bit, I don't even know what the word for it is. I just find it a bit, it's not disrespectful, it's just maybe distasteful when people are posting skeletons online and social media and stuff, because they were a person.
Okay, well, with that in mind, what do you think about skeletons and bodies and stuff being on display in museums?
Personally, it's one that I'm really conflicted about, because it is something I do find genuinely interesting, but also it sort of battles against with the side of me that's like, they were a person, they shouldn't be on display and on show. So it's a tricky one. It depends, especially like people leave their bodies to science and things like that. I mean, I think that is different, but yeah, that person was buried and had no idea that they would end up behind glass to be stared at by thousands of people. So I don't know. It's something I think about quite a lot, and I don't think I've sort of come to a real solid opinion about. But it's a really tricky one. Dealing with human remains and skeletons is a really tricky topic to deal with completely.
I want to push this just a little bit further, like no, not to be annoying, but I just think it's an interesting thing to talk about. Like, so with that in mind, what do you think about, you know, the old adage of, you know, well, once, you know, the soul has left the body, it's just a body kind of thing? Because we see that a lot in movies and stuff, in TV shows, but specifically period ones where it's like set in Viking times or something like that, and it's kind of saying that, you know, there is that disconnection, and it is just then an inanimate object. And I get why people have difficulty with that, because, you know, they see their loved one, they see that it's still that person, but at the same time, is it? You know what I mean? Well, what do you stand on that?
I think it's a case of just trying to be as sensitive to as many people as possible, if that makes sense. Like, perhaps, like, I see it as just the soul has left the body, they've died, they're not then anymore, so it's just a body. But then the person next to me might believe that something different, and I think it's all worthy of respect, and you need to try and be as delicate and as sensitive to everyone's beliefs as possible, I think. And maybe that's not possible, and maybe I'm being sort of naive in that thought, but I don't know. Like I say, I don't know if I'll ever come to a solid opinion on this, but yeah.
No, I get where you're coming from.
It's a tricky one.
I don't think it's a very cut and dry issue at all. I think it's yeah. Okay, moving it forward. Tell us some things about archaeology that not everyone will know.
Oh God, testing me now. Not everyone will know. There's a huge amount of paperwork.
Oh yeah.
So much paperwork.
What kind of paperwork do you have to do?
So we dig everything stratigraphically. So that's when each layer of soil, each different soil gets its own number, and that each soil needs to be recorded and drawn and everything like that. And it's, for example, skeletons will all get a number. Finds all get a number. So everything like bulk animal bone will all get a number, depending on what context it's from. And all of these things have a sheet of paperwork that goes alongside it. Every time you take a number out, you have to do a sheet of paperwork for it.
So you don't sort of do everything through computers then?
No. We do some things through computers, but a lot of things are done on paper by hand.
Wouldn't it be more efficient to do it by computer?
Well, how do you mean by computer?
Well, I mean, just like inputting data, cataloging all these kind of things.
Oh, well, we do that afterwards. You do that afterwards, but you can't take computers into the field because it rains. So, I mean, we did trial doing paperwork on tablets and things like that. And I mean, these things do all get put into computer records and they all get catalogued back at the office. But yeah, it's much more practical to do it on paper. As horrendous as it is trying to do paperwork in the rain, it's just the way it is, unfortunately. There's lots of paper. And even so we've got lots of drones and ways to do aerial photograph now, but there's something different that you get when you draw it by hand. So, for example, yesterday, I finished up doing a big plan drawing of the building that I'm excavating at the moment. And you see things when you're excavating something that you wouldn't see from a drone. So taking notes on colors and things like that, because it looks different when you dig it to when you photograph it sometimes. So the insight of the archaeologist is something that is just as valuable as a photograph.
Is that more? Sense. Is that more because the archaeologist sort of knows what to look for, or can see things with the naked eye that maybe?
Yeah, in a way, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't tell sort of the feel of the soil when you're digging, when you through a photograph.
Right.
Whereas you can when you're digging. So obviously you can tell if it's a sandy silt or if it's a clay silt or things like that. And you can't get that from a photograph. And obviously, photographs will alter color, screen will alter color. So being able to get the digger to write that all down is really important.
Given that we're talking about technology, how do you think modern technology and social media have affected archaeology, and has it affected it in a positive way?
So I think social media has, because it gets people, especially sort of in terms of research archaeology, where a lot of things run on donations. It gets more visitors to site, it gets more money to site, and it's just a good way it's good for making archaeology accessible. Because I mean, in the past, archaeology has just been sort of the realm of the sort of white middle-class man and so forth. But it's becoming wider, it's becoming more accessible to more people, and I think social media is a great tool in that. That it's not just, it's something, archaeology is for everyone. And it sounds so cheesy saying that, but there's the idea that sort of the language and things like that used in archaeology means that it's only for a small group of people. It's just something that social media completely blows out of the water, because it makes it available for everyone, which I think is really important, because archaeologists and historians don't own the past. Because it's everybody's past. So you can quote me on that.
That's a great quote. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just a little bit more on that. So do you think there's sort of is there more of an increased interest in archaeology now compared to, say, like when you were first studying it, like just in general?
I don't know. I think people have always had an interest in it. I think it's just easier for people to get to it or to research it now. And I mean, I was I was in the first group of people to do the archaeology degree at my university from first year. So we were new people, new course. And there's just been like a slow increase of people starting to do courses. So I don't know if that's maybe got something to do with it, but I think it's just availability. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of different fields and things like that. It's easier for people who are interested to access the information and to get to the sites and find out where the sites are.
Absolutely. What do you make of shows such as Vikings and other kind of similar TV shows that obviously are dramas first and foremost, but they do represent particular time periods and stuff like that? Because there's always this argument that, you know, oh, it's not realistic, or maybe it is true, like realistic. Like, do you think that they're generally positive or negative? Do you think they're harmful, you know, if they're like less realistic?
I like them personally. I've watched a lot of them. I remember when I was a teenager, I was really big on the Tudors series.
Right. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of, because that one in particular is. There
are things about that is accurate, and there's things about it that are really not accurate.
Is that the one where I can't remember the name of the actor, but there's a guy who played a young Henry VIII.
Yeah, so it's Jonathan Rhys-Meyers.
Right, and there was a lot of controversy about that because it was very historically inaccurate.
It is historically inaccurate, but I think at the end of the day, you have to know it's fiction. It's not a documentary. It's storytelling, and it doesn't.
But
go on.
Just playing devil's advocate. So like the average person watching that maybe doesn't know that, or do you not think in a way that might be harmful?
I don't know. I kind of think it would just encourage people to go and do their own research. But I can see what you mean, that the people who just watch it and aren't interested and just want to watch the thing, and they do get sort of inaccurate facts and things like that. Maybe that is a bad thing, but at the end of the day, is it that bad, really?
True.
I mean, there's probably things that I think about history that are wrong because I've misread a sentence in a textbook or something like that. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're interested, they'll go out and find out what the actual answer is. And if they're not interested, they're just watching good television. Will they really take in the things that are inaccurate?
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's just, but again, my personal opinion on it. But I enjoy watching them, to be honest. And I remember recently there was a lot of hubbub about this new program. I think it was a Channel 4 program about Anne Boleyn.
Yeah, the actress is black, right?
Yeah, and everyone was like, oh, it's not realistic, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, at least for me, they're just people telling a story.
Yeah.
And I don't think it matters, because everyone knows what Anne Boleyn was like in the past, because she's such a prominent figure.
You know what confuses me about that as well is like there's been so many, for example, there's been like about 1 million different versions of Robin Hood, which, you know, there's been like, say, black actors, people from different minorities and stuff. And it's like, who cares? It's just a story. Like,
exactly. And I mean, white people have been portraying like historical figures of color for centuries. And funnily enough, no one's ever had a problem with that. But, well, white people have never had a problem with that. And then suddenly the roles are reversed and it's this horrendous thing when it's just telling stories. And also, big up to, like, it's more representation, and it's important to see people of color in cinema and in storytelling. And also, from what I hear, that is not the most inaccurate thing about that Anne Boleyn show. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, you want to see historical inaccuracy, go watch the Tudors, man. That's just painful.
Yeah. Come on. Henry VIII was at least double whatever his name is, size when he was an old man.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, but wasn't the whole point that it was supposed to portray a young Henry VIII, or did I get that
but
wrong?
he's old in the last few seasons.
And he's still thin.
And he's still fairly thin, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's not right.
So no, exactly. So that goes all from like Henry VIII being a teenager all the way to when he dies.
Yeah.
And like he's still fairly sort of mid-build by the end of it, and I'm like, big.
He's big boy.
So, big boy. Big boned, sure.
Big boned, yeah, okay. I don't know if there's paintings or anything to go by. I mean, I think you're being generous there by saying big bone. Like, I mean,
yeah. So, yeah, in terms of those shows, I think it's just storytelling, and if it really bothers people, go and watch a documentary.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the only reason I really asked the question is because I was just curious from someone who's in the field of archaeology who takes it seriously as a profession. Like, I wondered if maybe people in the field kind of see shows like that and think, oh, this is damaging, this is, you know, in some way problematic. But I don't know, what I'm getting from what you're saying is like, as long as people are entertained by it and it's increasing interest in the field, then it's positive.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say it was positive or negative. It's just television.
Oh,
and I mean, I'm most of the part, like, if it is really inaccurate, we just get a good laugh out of it. there was a television.
Do you ever just sit there and just go, that's wrong, that's wrong,
yeah.
that's silly?
Yeah, I do, but that's because I'm incredibly pretentious. So there was a TV show, I can't remember if it was a BBC TV show, called Bone Kickers. I think it came out in like 2005 or something. Oh, okay. And it was supposed to be a sort of, this is what archaeologists are actually like. And it's got some of the most hilarious lines in it. Like, one of the characters kneels down next to the trench and says, "Reveal your secrets." No.
Oh, it's a drama series. It's piss, right?
No, it's genuine. It's not a comedy. This is supposed to be like what digging and being an archaeologist is like.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In the first, it's not a documentary either. It's just like a TV show.
Like a drama series, like where they're trying to be serious.
Yeah, there is a drinking game that goes alongside it. I can't remember the rules because last time I played it, I got very, very drunk. But yeah, I mean, it's got Hugh Bonneville in it. And loads of people, like, everyone in it is so recognizable. And we're just like, this show is so terrible. Like, I think in one of the first episodes, they're excavating what they think is a piece of the original cross that Jesus was crucified on. And it zooms out into an aerial shot of the trench, and the trench is crucifix shape. And it's just, it's so bad, but it's just brilliant to watch. But it's so bad.
Moving it forward, obviously you mentioned that you're studying for a PhD. Like, what's your kind of overall main aspiration in the field of archaeology?
I mean, at the moment, my aim is to become sort of a specialist. So, in shell specialist, if you will. And so, shells are very much sort of ignored in a lot of archaeology, and they can tell you a lot about a community. So that's kind of what I want to do. I want to look at shells from sites and sort of see what I can tell about them. And there's loads of specialists. I mean, my PhD supervisor, one of them is a specialist on fish bone, and one of them is a specialist on mammal bones. And then there's another gentleman in the department of archaeology that I'm part of that looks at pollen and things like that. And then there's Iron Age specialists, and there's landscape specialists and medieval specialists, things like that. So I kind of just want to do my bit and sort of see what information I can get from shells that would be useful and interesting, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. One thing I forgot to ask you earlier, which you kind of touched on a little bit, but I just wanted to know, what's like the most unprofessional thing you've seen someone or a group of people do on a dig? Like, have you ever seen stuff that's just like completely unacceptable? You mentioned a few examples earlier, but is there anything that sticks out to your mind?
The only one that sticks out in my mind wasn't actually an archaeologist. It was a machine driver we had on site. So we work with lots of builders and sort of people driving big machinery, because obviously, because of the speed we have to go at, we have to sort of strip the soil back with diggers, and sort of there's dumpers and things like that. And there was a dumper driver on a site that I was digging at, and I was up on an area of site by myself, stripping back the topsoil. And the dumper came up to me and he was just like, "Oh, I've got to go and take a Pro Plus because I'm falling asleep at the wheel of my dumper." And I was just like, "I'm gonna die." And then he came up to me later in the day and he was like, "Oh, can I go home early because I haven't slept for like the last 24 hours?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, the project officer said that we could finish half an hour early because it's a Friday. So, I mean, there's not that long till half three. And so can we just stay till then? He just left. He just took his dumper and left. And I was like, bye. So, I mean, that's probably, yeah. I was genuinely worried for my life because those machines are huge.
Yeah. So he could have accidentally like...
He could have straight up just run me over. And I'm like, no, thank you. But no, for the most part, the stuff, the unprofessional stuff I ever hear is all from stories, and you never really know how accurate those stories are because a lot of archaeologists are very good gossips, myself included. I'm not judging other people. We do like a gossip, but yeah. So most of the archaeologists I've worked with are pretty professional people. That's sometimes good. banter gets a little bit out of hand, and it gets to the point where it's not okay. But I mean, that tends to be sort of the worst kind of thing that I've come across. Sort of lad culture and banter is still quite a big thing in archaeology, and
so is it
not exactly. Sorry, say again.
Is it predominantly a male field then?
It was. It's a lot less now. I mean, I think I probably know more female archaeologists than I do male archaeologists now.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it has been very male oriented for a very long time, and it's not. It's like any place. It's not free of sexism, and I've seen a lot of stuff that's like, yeah, it's like I think
even to this day.
Yeah, sexism is a really big problem in archaeology, and as it is in a lot of things. Like I've had a lot, like friends of mine have had sort of inappropriate jokes made to them by people in charge. I mean, we've been walking through building sites with our high vis on, being wolf whistled at by builders and things like that. And yeah, it's just it's getting there, but it's still a big problem. And I mean, like, for example, in one of the companies I've worked for, all of the higher management were men and things like that. And just little things, as well as the bigger overarching problem of sexism in archaeology. But it's only recent that you get sites being forced to have portaloos and things like that, because men, it's so much easier for them in the wild to just, do their thing. But it's less feasible for women. And yeah, it's getting, like I say, bits of it are getting better, bits of it are staying the same and awful. But it's not really quite catered to equality yet, if that makes sense.
It's just interesting because, I mean, I've seen a major shift in probably the last 10, 15 years as far as things like sexism in the workplace and stuff like that. And obviously these things still do happen, but people tend to get called out on it. You see it on social media and stuff. So it's quite surprising to me that in a field like that, like it's still occurring to this day.
It's funny. It's like the amount of times that I've had someone come up to me and go, "Oh, we need a big, strong man to come and do this," or like site people who work for the building companies will come over and just assume that the person in charge is a man, and things like that. I've had people. So I've been supervising an area, and the site manager has come onto site, and even though I'm just standing next to him, he's walked over to the other side of site to talk to the only man on site. And things like that. And it's just, I can't remember where I was going to go with that, but it is a problem. And yeah, if I hear someone else turn around to me and go, "Oh, we need a big, strong man," I'm just going to like scream, because it happens so frequently. And for the most part, a lot of the female archaeologists I know are stronger than the men. So,
well, let's hope that gets better, because that's unacceptable.
Well, the awareness of it is getting better. I'm not really doing it justice. There's people who would be able to talk far better about this problem than me. But the awareness, and there's groups and societies and stuff that are looking into it. But it's still a problem that people need to be aware of. And yeah.
Thanks for sharing. So you're from Edinburgh.
Well, I was born in West Lothian, so west of Edinburgh.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I got two questions then for you.
Go for it.
But we'll start with Edinburgh, because I've been to Edinburgh. It's a very beautiful place. What are the best things and worst things about Edinburgh?
I mean, I love Edinburgh, and I really, really love the museum. National Museum of Scotland is amazing. I try to visit it every time I'm home. It's such an incredible museum, and it's such a beautiful building as well. And I've just always liked the atmosphere of Edinburgh. I just think it's quite welcoming, and sort of, the history is brilliant, and there's lots to do, and it's just, yeah, like you say, it's a very, very beautiful city. But yeah, I love Edinburgh. It's good.
Any drawbacks? Anything not good about it?
I would never say such a thing about Edinburgh. Never say such a thing. It gets busy.
Yeah, like tourism and stuff.
As much as I love the Fringe Festival, and there was a period in my life where I was going to the Fringe like every summer, but when you're trying to do something at Edinburgh, when you're not at the Fringe Festival, is a pain in the butt. Yeah. It's like trying to walk up the Royal Mile through like throngs of tourists, and I'm just like, this fear. But yeah, other than that, I love Edinburgh. Much to the hilarity of my Glaswegian friends. I think Edinburgh is the worst and Glasgow is the best.
Is that just because they're really patriotic well, not patriotic, but like proud of it, Glasgow?
Oh, the sort of the Glasgow-Edinburgh sort rivalry. It's a big thing. It's a big thing. If you're in Glasgow, Edinburgh's the worst. If you're in Edinburgh, Glasgow's the worst. I think it's like a football thing. I'm not really sure.
It's interesting as well, isn't it? Because Edinburgh is obviously the capital of Scotland.
Yeah.
All right. And then obviously, but Glasgow is such a, like, one thing that struck me when I was in Edinburgh is it's quite small. Like when you see it, like the old town and even the surrounding areas, it's pretty small. And look, there's nothing against this. It's gorgeous. But when you compare that with Glasgow, which is like huge, it makes you wonder like why that's the capital.
Well, it's it's historical rather than it being, this is the biggest city, so we're going to make it the capital. Edinburgh's been the capital for centuries now, so it's just sort of historical legacy.
It's just interesting because it happens in other countries. Like I think in Australia, the capital is a place called Canberra, and apparently there's not much going on there. But obviously, most people when they think of Australia, first thing they think is probably Sydney or maybe Perth or something like that. But
Melbourne.
Melbourne, of course, yeah.
But again, it's the same. It's like you talk to an Australian person, you ask where they're from, and then you mention another city, and they're like, "Oh, Canberra."
Obviously, you mentioned that you're from West Lothian.
Yeah.
So, what are the best and worst things about West Lothian?
I'm not a big fan of West Lothian. The best thing about West Lothian is my gran still lives there.
Oh.
That's the best thing about West Lothian.
What don't you like about it then?
It's just kind of declining, as I think a lot of places are, because of just this industry and things like that. It's just,
as in what, too much commercialism or something like that?
I think the population is just more headed towards Edinburgh and things like that. So they're like commuter towns now.
Oh, okay.
So it's less money going into the centres and things like that. So they're a little bit run down. At least the one that I grew up, I grew up in Broxburn, and at least the last couple of times I've been through, the city centres look quite sad, I find.
I find a similar problem in England. I mean, obviously it's different in major cities. Like I live in Manchester now, and I'm originally from London, and I've seen, particularly when you go to this is to be expected, but when you go to the outskirts of cities and stuff and the suburbs and whatnot, you always often find this. I mean, to be honest, even in Manchester, I can find areas that are not that far from the city centre that are pretty run down and there's not much money or investment in. But then you take a 20-minute bus ride, or if that, and then you find somewhere that's got like modern housing and flats and all this. So it's interesting as far as like where they put the money and stuff like that, and just developments across the UK in general.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm in Wick at the moment, which is a town really close to the top of Scotland. And my dad was born here. And it used to be a very industrial town. Like it used to have a big glass factory, which is where my granddad used to live. Used to work. Didn't live in a glass factory. Worked in a glass factory. But the glass factory is closed now, and the centre of Wick, again, it's kind of a little bit sad looking. And so the centre is full of sort of charity shops and things like that. But on the outskirts, there's like a massive Tesco's on one side, and then like a massive Lidl on the other side. But the middle is just kind of a little bit, could use a little bit of money injected into it, I think. Because in the sunshine, when all the flowers are out, it can be a really beautiful little town. I think it's just, anywhere else, it's just sad in the rain.
So this next question, I'm mainly asking this was, I believe that you are the first guest from Scotland I've had. I believe.
I'm honoured.
So yeah, welcome.
You've managed to hit a very patriotic Scot as well, so you're fine.
Well, actually, that's good, because this next question should get an interesting response. So, does this... And okay, I should give some context as well. I've been to Edinburgh and Aberdeen, and I've had many Scottish friends over the years, and all I can say is lovely, awesome people.
Good start. Good start.
But from a Scottish perspective, do you think, or is there a Scottish like hatred of the English? Does that still exist as a thing, or is that just media and rubbish?
I think it more exists in jokes than anything else. I mean, I've lived in England. I lived in England for 3 years. I've got a lot of friends who are English, and I mean, I live in Orkney, and a lot of my best friends are really English and things like that. So I don't have any particular hatred towards England, other than, you know, the politics. But that's you can't blame the everyman for the politics.
No, even I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, like most people do.
Yeah,
and I think that was really nice. Is that archaeology tends to be very liberal.
Yep.
So archaeologists tend to be a very liberal group of people. And so when I was living in England, I never really met any of the sort of horrendous conservatives or people with sort of negative views that I don't share. And things like that.
I mean, it's the same in England. Like, I don't think I've ever heard people be like, "Oh, screw Scotland or Ireland" or anything like that. You just don't hear it. But it's interesting because, as you say, everyone hears the joke. The jokes are funny. It's just part of, I suppose, being British or whatever, or being from the UK. But obviously, historically, there has been a lot of, or was a lot of, you know, quite rightful, you know, hatred between the countries.
Yeah.
So it's interesting looking at that now, especially, you know, like I know you said you didn't want to get into politics, and we won't go into.
Hey, no, I'm happy to talk about politics. I'm maybe just not the most knowledgeable about it.
No, well, me neither. But I just find it interesting, for instance, with things like, you know, with the Scottish referendum that happened twice, because it was a very split thing, but the overarching majority were sort of for staying in the union. And when I looked at that, I kind of thought, this has nothing to do with patriotism or anything like that. No. It's fully to do with the fact that, like, together we're better versus apart, like economically speaking. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I voted yes, so I couldn't comment. I couldn't possibly comment.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, what were you thinking? Like,
mine was all about centralised power of government.
Right.
So the whole of Scotland can vote against something, and all it would take is for all of London to vote for something. And then it would get through,
which is ridiculous.
Agree. Yeah, and that is the main. I didn't vote yes for any sort of hatred of England reason or anything like that. Just having our own say, because things are so much different, especially the further north you get. It's such a different way of life than it is sort of in your sort of metropolitan cities and things like that.
I gotta say as well, like I feel like if you're gonna operate under the UK, like for instance, if you look at the way COVID has played out, it's been overly positive for Scotland as far as managing itself, like, and because it would be stupid for like the decisions, and it's even a little bit questionable decisions being made in the south that affect the north here in Manchester. Like, I have to say, living here, I've only lived here for like a year and a half, but I've really got the impression that, like, they don't care about the north a lot. Like, very much, like, for instance, Andy Burnham, the MP for Manchester, really had to fight before we went into one of the lockdowns to get like funding from the government so that Manchester just wouldn't suffer. And from what I understand, they let Liverpool suffer and operate by themselves, and we just about managed to get funding for Manchester. And that left a very kind of lasting impression on me, because, you know, I've only come back to the UK recently in the last couple of years. And obviously life in the UK doesn't change that much as far as like how it is and whatnot. But you do, once you start living around in different places in the UK, you do start seeing the differences, and especially in like people's lives, the way people are, etc., etc. But that kind of made me think more and more about like the situation in Scotland and like how kind of ludicrous it is to have decisions that affect everyday life in Scotland made by people in the south. Like that doesn't make sense. Like I think if you have like a law, for example, I don't know, let's say something mundane like okay, here's a really good example. It will illustrate my point. So like when the whole law came in about like not smoking in your car, right? I think that's fair. That you could apply anywhere in the UK. That's reasonable, right? But when you've got stuff that's like ultimately governing things like Scottish economy, general day-to-day life, like I don't really see how it makes much sense to have all those, and also it delays things. I imagine there must be quite a lot of delaying in trying to pass through bills because it just has to go through Parliament in London, and that takes time, you know. Plus, I think you have to go through the House of Lords as well.
Could you imagine how much more difficult it would have been to sort of deal with COVID in Scotland if it was England, if it was the Parliament in London making the choices?
Well, I can say now that it would have, because it was already delayed in England, so it would have been, it would have led to a rise in cases, I think, in Scotland, to be honest. So yeah, it's good that they kind of afforded more power to the Scottish government in that sense. Yeah. Interesting one.
It is a tricky one, and I think, like, going back, it's got nothing to do with not liking the English.
Yeah, no, I never get that impression. Like every time I hear about the Scottish referendum, the first thing I think about is, it's just politics. It's just what's good for Scotland. Because I remember thinking, like, if Scotland did leave the UK and most likely would join the EU, Scotland has a lot of exports. I mean, obviously alcohol, big one.
Big on the whiskey.
But there are exports. There are arguments that Scotland could kind of be self-sufficient without the rest of the UK, and it's an interesting one. It really is, because I think you could make arguments for and against as far as like
absolutely.
Yeah, but just from an economical standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that it's not that there's not enough information. It's almost like there's too much information, so it's kind of hard to separate what the actual situation is, because so many people are saying so many different things about the same basic issues that it's impossible to tell, really, at least from my perspective as someone who's very much a novice in politics, and sort of just it's a tricky one. It's complicated, and it's hard for a lot of people to just get their heads around a lot of these things, I think.
I love asking my guests this. It's my favorite question. What's the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
That having good self-esteem isn't arrogant.
Yes. I can't count how many people have turned around and called me arrogant or narcissistic, and it's like, you're wrong. Being confident and believing in yourself has nothing to do with those things.
It's like, I mean, openly going to go into a little mental health rant here. So I have been in therapy for the last few months, and it's all been focused on low self-esteem, because I've had low self-esteem my entire life. And it's just like my therapist has just been telling me and sort of trying to drill into me the ways of thinking about the things you do in a positive light, and that it's okay to shout about the things you do well and be proud of yourself. And I think we were actually chatting about this a couple of sessions ago about how I think it's a very British attitude that, be humble and things like that. Is because I've had occasions where I've been saying that, I did this and I did this really well, and someone's turned around and gone, and she's humble too. Things like that. And it's just like, be proud of the things you achieve, because it's amazing. And just being confident is something I've always really struggled with. And it's sort of getting there to the point where I kind of don't feel awful all the time. But it's just, it's a weird attitude that so many people in this country have, that being proud of yourself is a bad thing.
Yeah, I've never quite understood that one. I totally get where you're coming from.
Mhm.
I have to be very careful with the words that I choose. I mean, I've suffered from self-esteem issues my whole life. I think in the last couple of years, I've sort of learned to at least believe in myself. But even to this day, I doubt myself all the time. And that element of it about our culture really doesn't help. Because even when I'm sitting there and I'm doing like a live stream or something, and we're talking about, let's say, how well, like, I don't know, like my TikTok is doing or something like that, and people will be like, yeah, congratulations, you're very talented. And when I hear that, I always say, obviously, thank you, but I feel like I can't say things like, I don't know, I've gotten better in podcasting this past year, which is that's a fact. That's not.
Yeah.
That's when I look back, objectively speaking, to like my very first interviews and then where we're at now, it has gotten better because I've got better at asking questions and more confident and better at holding conversations, etc., etc. But saying that, as you say, it gets you targeted. People are like, well, that's not very modest, that's not very humble.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what else are you supposed to say? Like, what, you can't say that you've gotten better or something? Like,
the thing that really stuck with me that I was thinking about is that when someone gives you a compliment and your automatic reaction is like, no, that's not true at all, oh, you're lying, the effect that has on the other person as well, it's just like you're completely denying what they're saying. So it's not just like
can't win.
affecting you, it affects other people. This sort of need to be humble and to be, and I'm not saying go out and be the most arrogant person ever. It's just be happy, like trying to be happy in yourself and being proud of what you achieve is really important, and not devaluing yourself. And that's a big thing. It's like I was when I was saying about that I study shells. Like, I expect people to laugh at that, so I make it into a joke. When in reality, it's actually really cool.
Yeah.
So, that's the constant devaluing that I think me and a lot of other people do. I mean, a lot of my friends have the same problems as well, and it's just learning to accept yourself, I think.
Couldn't agree more. As a final question, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Not really, to be honest. I don't have anything to plug or anything like that. Just archaeology is cool.
I second that.
Finger guns,
awesome.
Archaeology is cool. I don't know.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, brilliant. Thank you for being such an excellent guest. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And
I hope it was all right.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been really cool learning about archaeology from an actual person in the field. So yeah, thank you very much.
I was very nervous. I've probably spoken a lot of rubbish.
No, it's been brilliant. I've learned something. I'm sure all of our listeners have learned something. So thank you very much for that.
It's all right.
And to all my listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, as always, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.